The morning sun streamed through the high windows of the town's old courthouse, casting long beams of light across the polished wooden floor. The building smelled faintly of paper and old books, and the quiet rustle of people finding their seats filled the air. Jamal sat near the front, his small frame barely filling the hard wooden bench. His school uniform was neat but a little worn, the buttons slightly scratched from years of use. His hands were wrapped tightly around the straps of his backpack, as though it might protect him from whatever was about to happen. It was not the first time Jamal had been inside a courtroom. He had once visited on a school trip, where everything had seemed big and impressive, the judge's chair like a throne and the sound of the gavel like thunder. But this time was different. This time, he was here for real. His mother had told him again and again that he hadn't done anything wrong and that today was just about clearing things up. But Jamal still felt a nervous knot in his stomach. People didn't just call you into a courtroom for nothing. The judge entered through the side door, his robe sweeping behind him. His hair was a mix of silver and black, neatly combed, and his eyes were sharp. Everyone stood when he walked in. Jamal rose too, though his knees felt a little shaky. When the judge sat down, the room became very still. His voice, deep and steady, filled the space as he began to speak. But when his eyes landed on Jamal, there was a flicker, a tiny narrowing, as if he had already decided what he thought. "Name?" the judge asked. "Jamal Carter, sir," the boy said, his voice small but clear. The judge leaned back in his chair, looking at Jamal with a kind of distant curiosity. "You were told to be here at 9 o'clock, he said, his tone sharp, "and yet you arrived late." Jamal's head snapped up. "I was here, sir," he said quickly. The judge cut him off. "No excuses. In this court, we respect time." His words were clipped, as if they were final. Jamal felt heat rising in his cheeks. He wanted to explain that he had been outside at 8:50, helping his elderly neighbor carry groceries from the street to her door. He had seen the time, had rushed here, and had been sitting quietly in the back until they called his name. But the judge's tone made it clear he didn't want explanations. A murmur went through the small audience seated behind him. Jamal kept his eyes on the floor, pretending not to hear. His mother, seated in the second row, clenched her jaw, her eyes burning into the back of the judge's head. She knew her son, and she knew when someone was judging him for reasons. That had nothing to do with facts. The clerk handed the judge a file, the papers inside crisp and neatly arranged. The judge flipped through them, his expression unmoving. Jamal couldn't read what was on the pages, but he could feel the weight of them, as though each sheet carried something important about him, something that might decide how today ended. "Step forward," the judge said. Jamal obeyed, his sneakers squeaking softly on the floor as he approached the bench. He stood straight, trying to look calm, even though his heart was beating so fast he could feel it in his throat. "You're here about an incident last week," the judge said, looking over the papers. "A matter involving property damage." Jamal's chest tightened. He knew what the judge meant, the broken window at the small grocery store near his school, but he hadn't broken it. He had been there when it happened, yes, but only because he had run to see what the loud crash was. The real culprit had been an older boy, someone Jamal barely knew. "Yes, sir," Jamal said softly. The judge peered down at him. "And yet, you claim no responsibility?" "No, sir. I didn't do it," Jamal said, forcing himself to meet the judge's gaze. The judge's lips pressed into a thin line, as if he didn't believe a word. From the corner of the courtroom, a man in a dark suit watched silently. He sat apart from the others, his hands folded neatly on his lap, his eyes fixed on every movement, every word. Nobody seemed to notice him. Not yet. Jamal shifted his weight from one foot to the other, wishing he could explain everything clearly, wishing the judge would give him just a moment to speak. But instead, the judge waved a hand dismissively and turned to the clerk. "We'll continue in a moment," he said, as though Jamal were a minor detail in a much larger picture. The room hummed softly with whispers again. Jamal returned to his seat, his shoulders hunched, his eyes on the floor. His mother reached over and gave his hand a gentle squeeze. "Hold on, baby," she whispered. "Just hold on." And in the far corner, the man in the dark suit continued to watch, silent, patient, waiting for the right moment to step forward. The courtroom remained quiet. The faint ticking of the old clock above the judge's bench, the only sound breaking the tension. Jamal's fingers fidgeted around the straps of his backpack. He tried to steady his breathing, but each inhale seemed too loud in the silence. He had sat in courtrooms before, but never like this. This wasn't a school trip or a visit. This was real. This was about his name, his honor, and something that had nothing to do with truth, but everything to do with perception. "Jamal Carter," the judge began again, his voice sharper this time. "Do you understand the severity of appearing late for a court appointment?" "Yes, sir," Jamal replied, trying to keep his voice even. But inside, panic bubbled. He hadn't been late. He had arrived on time. He had seen the clock, had run as fast as he could after helping Mrs. Thompson with her groceries. He wanted the judge to know that, but the words felt small in his throat. The judge leaned forward slightly, peering over the rim of his glasses. "Your actions, or lack thereof, caused a disruption. This court does not tolerate carelessness. You must take responsibility." Jamal's cheeks burned. He wanted to speak up, to explain calmly that he had done nothing wrong, that he had only tried to help someone in need. But before he could, the judge waved his hand as if dismissing him. "Silence," the judge commanded, and the word fell like a hammer in the room. Jamal swallowed hard and sat back down, trying to control the tremor in his hands. His mother's eyes were sharp and protective. She wanted to jump up, to argue, to demand that the judge hear the truth. But she remained seated, biting her lip, letting Jamal face this moment, knowing he needed to stand for himself. The gallery around them murmured softly. People shifted in their seats, some exchanging glances. Jamal could feel the weight of their eyes on him. Some looked curious, some judgmental, and some, he thought, sympathetic. But it didn't matter. He had to find his own strength. The clerk passed another set of papers to the judge. The judge scanned them, his expression unchanging. He paused on one sheet longer than the others, as though the words there confirmed a thought he had already formed. Jamal could feel the unfairness pressing down on him like a heavy blanket. "You claim you were elsewhere when the incident occurred," the judge said. "Yet witnesses state otherwise. What do you say to that?" I wasn't the one who broke the window," Jamal said quickly. "I ran to see what happened. I didn't touch anything." The judge's eyes narrowed. "Your explanation is noted, but your presence at the scene, no matter the circumstances, reflects poor judgment. You must understand the consequences of being involved in such events, even indirectly." Jamal's stomach twisted. He had tried to do the right thing. He had helped, had run toward trouble to see if someone needed aid. Yet the judge treated him as though he were guilty. Every word cut sharper than the last. From the corner of the courtroom, the man in the dark suit watched quietly. He didn't move. His gaze never left Jamal, and yet he seemed invisible to everyone else. He was calm, but beneath his composure, he felt a flicker of anger. This boy did not deserve the harshness he faced, not from someone who should have been fair, who should have been just. Jamal tried to meet the judge's gaze, but the older man's eyes were cold, distant, and judgmental. "Do you understand the seriousness of your actions?" the judge asked again. "I understand, sir," Jamal said softly. "But I didn't do anything wrong. I was helping my neighbor." The judge's lips pressed together tightly. A pause. hung heavy in the air. Then he spoke again, louder this time, his voice ringing through the courtroom. In this court, what matters is the law. Feelings, excuses, or good intentions do not excuse negligence. You will accept the consequences. Jamal's chest tightened. His heart raced. He had done nothing wrong, yet he was being accused, judged, and condemned in front of everyone. It felt unfair, and it hurt. Deep inside, he felt small, powerless. Sit down, young man, the judge snapped. Jamal obeyed immediately, sinking back into the bench. He could feel his mother's hand brushing against his shoulder, a silent message of support. The courtroom murmurs grew louder as people exchanged glances. Some shook their heads. Some whispered quietly. Jamal felt the eyes of the whole room, weighing on him as if each glance were a tiny judgment, confirming what the judge had just said. Then Jamal noticed the man in the dark suit again. His presence seemed different now, more focused, more deliberate. The man's eyes were steady, not just observing, but calculating. Jamal didn't know it, but this man was no ordinary observer. He held authority far beyond the courtroom, authority that could change everything. But Jamal didn't notice the man's importance yet. All he knew was that his chest ached from embarrassment. His hands were sweaty, and the words he wanted to say were stuck in his throat. The judge returned to his papers, flipping through them slowly, deliberately. Jamal felt the room closing in around him. He had tried to explain, tried to defend himself, and yet it felt like the world was against him. Remember this, young man, the judge said, not looking directly at him. Actions have consequences. Even good intentions cannot erase mistakes. Jamal swallowed hard, nodding silently. His mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, anger, confusion, shame, and fear. He wanted to shout, to cry, to tell everyone the truth, but he stayed quiet, keeping his dignity intact. The man in the dark suit shifted, slightly in his seat. Jamal still didn't know who he was, but there was a calm strength in his presence. It was a reminder that sometimes, even when things seemed unfair, someone was watching, someone who could make a difference. As the judge called for a short recess, Jamal sank back into his seat, letting out a small, shaky breath. His mother's hand remained on his shoulder, grounding him. Outside the courtroom, the sunlight seemed a little brighter, a little warmer. And though the moment had been painful, Jamal felt a tiny spark of hope, the hope that truth might eventually be recognized, and justice might be served. The recess bell echoed softly through the courthouse, signaling a brief pause, but it did little to ease the tension in the room. Jamal remained seated, his hands still gripping the straps of his backpack. He tried to calm his racing heart, but each memory of the judge's harsh words pressed heavily on his mind. He had always believed in fairness. He had always believed that if you did the right thing, people would see it. But today, fairness seemed like a distant dream, and the courthouse felt colder than ever. Jamal's mother leaned down and whispered, "Don't worry, Jamal. Stay strong. We'll get through this." Her words were meant to comfort, but they only made him aware of how vulnerable he felt. He had never been treated like this before, publicly shamed and accused despite knowing he was innocent. The courtroom, once a place of order, now felt like a place of judgment, where even honesty could not protect him. Around him, people shifted uneasily. Some were whispering to each other, their voices barely audible but filled with curiosity. Others stared openly, their eyes reflecting judgment, confusion, or even mild amusement at the spectacle. Jamal felt the weight of every gaze. He lowered his head, wishing he could disappear. He wanted to tell the truth, to make them understand, that he had only been helping Mrs. Thompson, that he had not touched the broken window, that he had tried to do what was right. But his voice had been drowned out before he could fully explain. From the corner of the courtroom, the man in the dark suit observed quietly. He had not moved since the proceedings had begun, but his eyes followed Jamal with an intensity that seemed to carry more meaning than anyone else could see. He noted the boy's posture, the subtle tremble in his fingers, the flicker of pride beneath the fear. Jamal felt small, but he also felt a stubborn spark inside him. Despite the humiliation, despite the unfairness, he refused to let himself be broken. He straightened his back slightly, trying to hold on to that inner strength. "Mom," he whispered when he finally looked up. "Why is he treating me like this? I didn't do anything wrong." His mother's eyes softened. She reached for his hand and held it firmly. "Sometimes people judge others without knowing the full story," she said gently. "But we know the truth, and that's what matters." Jamal nodded, though it did little to ease the ache in his chest. The boy had always trusted adults, believing they would do what was right. But today, trust felt fragile. The courtroom walls seemed taller, the gavel heavier, and the judge's words sharper. The clerk returned, signaling that the recess was over. Jamal rose slowly, feeling every step echo across the polished floor. The judge sat silently, flipping through his papers, as though he had not noticed the boy's struggle at all. "Step forward," the judge commanded again. Jamal obeyed, moving toward the bench with a mix of nervousness and determination. He kept his eyes forward, refusing to look at the gallery. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if the weight of misunderstanding pressed down on him. "You have been accused of negligence," the judge said, his tone rigid. "Even if your intentions were good, your actions contributed to a disruption. You must understand the seriousness of this." Jamal took a deep breath, trying to steady his voice. "Sir, I didn't do anything wrong. I only tried to help someone. I didn't touch the window, I didn't cause the problem. I only ran to see if anyone was hurt." The judge's face remained unreadable, but his eyes flickered briefly, a small sign that he was hearing the words, even if he wasn't acknowledging them. A murmur ran through the courtroom again. Some people whispered, some shook their heads, and others simply watched silently. Jamal could feel the invisible pressure of expectation and judgment bearing down on him. He felt exposed, vulnerable, and misunderstood. From the corner, the man in the dark suit leaned slightly forward. He didn't speak, but his presence seemed to radiate reassurance. Jamal didn't know who he was, but he could sense a quiet strength emanating from him, a silent promise that someone was watching, someone who could act if things continued unfairly. The judge tapped his gavel lightly, signaling silence. "Your explanation is noted," he said, his voice cold but controlled. "However, intent does not excuse the outcome. You must accept the court's judgment, whatever it may be." Jamal's chest tightened. He wanted to cry, wanted to shout, wanted someone to recognize that he was telling the truth. But he remained still, standing quietly, holding on to the small amount of dignity he had left. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath. Even the sound of the judge's pen scratching against the paper felt loud in the silence. Jamal's mother squeezed his hand, giving him a small nod of encouragement. She believed in him, and that small gesture gave him a little strength to face the moment. The judge finally looked up from his papers, his eyes scanning the room. "We will proceed," he said, and his voice, though firm, carried a subtle weight of finality. Jamal returned to his seat, feeling a mixture of fear and defiance. He had spoken the truth, even if the world had not listened. He had tried to stand up for himself, even in the face of unfairness. And somewhere deep inside, he felt a small flicker of hope that justice might eventually prevail. In the far corner, the man in the dark suit remained seated. He did not move, but his eyes never left Jamal. The boy could not yet see it, but this man held the power to change the course of the day, to ensure that fairness would be restored, and to make sure that Jamal's voice, at last, would be heard. As the courtroom settled for the next phase of the hearing, Jamal leaned back slightly, his hands still gripping his backpack. The pain of being judged unfairly weighed on him, but he refused to let it break him completely. He had survived the first blow of injustice, and he would face the next, one step at a time. The courtroom fell silent once more as the recess ended. Jamal rose from his bench, his hands still gripping the straps of his backpack. Each step toward the judge's bench felt heavier than the last, but he tried to steady his breath. He knew the eyes of the room were on him. Some were curious, some skeptical, and some openly judgmental. Jamal's mother sat a little straighter in her seat, her eyes fixed on him. She wanted to speak, to defend him, but she stayed quiet, letting Jamal take the moment to face the situation. He appreciated her silent support. It gave him a small but steady courage he hadn't realized he had. The judge shuffled some papers before him, his expression as cold and rigid as it had been all morning. "Young man, you will now be questioned regarding the events that led to the alleged incident at the store," he said. His voice was stern, yet measured, as though he were reminding Jamal of his place in the room. Jamal took a deep breath. "Yes, sir," he said quietly. "I was near the store when the window broke, but I did not touch it. I only ran to see if anyone was hurt." A murmur ran through the gallery again, some people nodding slightly, others shaking their heads. Jamal felt the tension building, the invisible weight of every judgmental gaze pressing down on him. He wanted the room to understand, but words alone seemed so small compared to the assumptions already formed. The judge raised his eyes and looked directly at Jamal. "You must understand the impact of being present at the scene of an incident. Even if you did not actively cause harm, your presence is considered a form of responsibility. Do you comprehend this?" Jamal's chest tightened. "Yes, sir," he said, though he disagreed. It felt unfair, as if no one cared about his intentions or the truth. His stomach knotted with frustration, yet he stayed calm, refusing to raise his voice, refusing to give the judge any reason to dismiss him further. From the corner of the courtroom, the man in the dark suit shifted slightly in his chair. His sharp eyes followed every word and movement. Though Jamal did not know it, this man had the authority to intervene if the situation became too unjust. His presence was quiet, almost invisible, but there was a sense of calm reassurance radiating. From him, Jamal's mother watched the man closely as well. She did not yet know his role, but something about the way he observed the proceedings gave her hope. Someone who cared, someone who could make sure that fairness had a chance, was here. The clerk passed another set of papers to the judge. He skimmed through them quickly, his expression unreadable. Then he set them aside and looked at Jamal. "We have statements from witnesses who claim they saw you near the broken window. They say you were involved in some way. What do you have to say about these statements?" Jamal swallowed hard. He wanted to explain that the witnesses had been mistaken, that they did not see what really happened. He tried to think clearly. I wasn't involved, sir," he said. "I only came because I wanted to make sure nobody was hurt. I didn't touch anything. I only ran to see if someone needed help." The judge's face remained impassive. "Your explanation is noted. However, the law considers presence at the scene as partial responsibility unless proven otherwise. Are you prepared to accept this understanding?" Jamal felt a wave of frustration rise inside him, but he held it back. I understand, sir," he said quietly, his voice steady despite the tension. As the judge considered his papers, Jamal's eyes wandered slightly to the man in the corner. Their gaze met briefly, and though Jamal did not know him, there was a sense of reassurance in that silent acknowledgement. The man's presence reminded Jamal that he was not entirely alone, that someone capable of justice was watching. The judge finally spoke again, his tone colder, more final. "We will continue with questioning from both sides. Be aware that your responses will be noted in detail. You must answer truthfully and concisely. Jamal nodded. Yes, sir, he said, feeling the heavy weight of the room settle around him once more. The first witness was called, the store clerk. He was a nervous young man, shifting from foot to foot as he spoke. I saw Jamal near the window when it broke, he said, glancing at the judge. I don't know if he did anything, but he was there and it all happened so fast. Jamal's chest tightened. He wanted to speak, to correct the misunderstanding, but he had to let the process take its course. The courtroom was tense, the air thick with anticipation. The man in the dark suit leaned slightly forward, observing everything carefully. His presence seemed to stabilize the room, though no one but Jamal and his mother could sense it. Jamal, for a moment, felt that silent reassurance again, a quiet promise that someone who cared about truth was paying attention. When the clerk finished, the judge looked at Jamal. You may respond. Jamal took a deep breath. Sir, I understand that it looked like I was involved. But I promise, I only went there to help. I didn't break anything, I didn't touch anything, and I was only trying to make sure everyone was safe. The judge studied him carefully, as if weighing every word. Jamal felt the weight of the room on him, the curiosity, the judgment, the expectation. His mother's hand brushed his shoulder, silently encouraging him to keep going, to stay calm, to stand tall even in the face of misunderstanding. The judge finally leaned back, his expression unreadable. Very well. We will review all statements and evidence carefully before proceeding further. As Jamal returned to his seat, he felt a mix of relief and continued tension. The questioning was over for now, but the stakes had risen. The courtroom had seen him, had heard him, and had judged him, even if unfairly. From the corner, the man in the dark suit remained seated, observing every detail. Jamal did not know his identity yet, but the man's presence was a quiet reminder that sometimes, even in the face of injustice, someone capable of changing the outcome could intervene. Jamal leaned back in his seat, gripping his backpack, his mother's hand still on his shoulder. The first wave of unfairness had hit him hard, but he had survived it. He had spoken the truth, stayed calm, and faced the judgment. The next phase would bring even more challenges, but he felt a small spark of hope that the truth, and someone who truly understood it, could still prevail. The courtroom was quiet, almost too quiet. Jamal sat in his seat, his hands resting lightly on his backpack, but he could feel his heart pounding in his chest. Each tick of the clock echoed louder than before, marking time he wished he could slow down. Every face in the gallery seemed to stare at him, and every whisper felt like it carried judgment. The judge's eyes, sharp and unreadable, followed him as he prepared for the next part of the hearing. Jamal's chest tightened. He had already spoken, explained himself, and yet the room still seemed skeptical. The weight of expectation pressed down on him from every direction. "Next witness," the judge announced, flipping through papers. His voice was firm but held a subtle tone of finality, signaling that this would be the decisive part of the hearing. Jamal's stomach twisted. He didn't know what this witness would say, and the thought of another person misunderstanding him made his hands tremble slightly. His mother leaned over and gave his shoulder a reassuring squeeze. "Stay calm, Jamal," she whispered. "Tell the truth, like you always do. That's all that matters." Jamal nodded, drawing in a deep breath. He tried to focus on the rhythm of his breathing, letting it steady him. But before he could even prepare, the door opened, and a man stepped in. He was older, with a kind but serious face, and the way he carried himself immediately drew attention. He walked toward the stand with quiet confidence, and Jamal's heart sank as he realized this might be someone whose testimony could determine the outcome. The judge's voice cut through the tension. "Please state your name for the record, Mr." Daniels, the man said, his voice calm and steady. I was present at the scene and can provide my account of the incident. Jamal felt a mix of fear and hope. He had no idea what Mr. Daniels would say. Would he be accused again? Would he be defended? Every second stretched like an eternity as the courtroom waited. The man on the stand began speaking, describing the incident in detail. He explained how Jamal had arrived after the window broke, that the boy had not touched the glass, and that he had immediately tried to help others who might have been injured. The words flowed steadily, clearly, and with undeniable sincerity. Jamal's chest lifted slightly. Finally, someone was speaking the truth. The tension in the room shifted, a subtle wave of acknowledgement sweeping over the audience. Murmurs spread through the gallery as people realized that the boy had been honest all along. The judge leaned forward, peering at the witness with a careful eye. "And are you certain of these details?" he asked, his tone sharp but controlled. "Yes, Your Honor," Mr. Daniels replied without hesitation. "I saw him arrive moments after the incident, trying to ensure no one was hurt. He did not touch the window. He acted responsibly and with concern for others." The courtroom seemed to hold its breath. Jamal felt his hands loosen slightly on his backpack straps. This was the moment he had been waiting for. The moment where truth might finally overcome the misunderstanding that had weighed so heavily on him all morning. The judge sat back, folding his hands. For the first time, his expression betrayed a flicker of surprise, maybe even doubt. He looked at Jamal differently now, not as a careless boy, but as someone who had been misunderstood, judged too quickly, and treated unfairly. From the corner of the courtroom, the man in the dark suit remained seated, his eyes still fixed on Jamal. The boy did not yet know that this man was more than just an observer. He was someone with the authority to ensure that fairness would prevail. But even without knowing his identity, Jamal felt the quiet reassurance of being seen, of someone believing in him when the world had not. The judge finally spoke again, his voice softer than before. "It appears there has been a misunderstanding regarding your presence at the scene. We will take these new statements into account. Thank you, Mr. Daniels." Jamal felt a rush of relief, but it was mixed with lingering tension. He knew the process wasn't over yet, but the turning point had arrived. The truth was finally beginning to emerge, and he felt a small, steady hope burning inside him. The judge called for a brief pause to review the statements. Jamal returned to his seat, his hands finally resting loosely on his lap. His mother looked at him, eyes shining. "You did well," she whispered. "You stayed strong and honest. That's what mattered." Jamal nodded, a small smile forming despite the exhaustion. For the first time that morning, he felt a sense of pride. He had faced the unfairness, spoken his truth, and had not broken under the weight of judgment. As the judge reviewed the statements, the man in the dark suit rose quietly and approached the bench. The courtroom didn't notice at first. He spoke, briefly in low tones with the judge, his words calm but authoritative. Though Jamal could not hear them, he could sense that something significant was happening, that the invisible hand of fairness was guiding the outcome. After a few tense minutes, the judge returned to the bench, his face noticeably calmer. He looked at Jamal and his mother. "It is clear that there has been a misunderstanding. Based on the witness statements, including those provided today, it is evident that the boy acted responsibly and with good intentions." A collective sigh seemed to ripple through the room. The tension lifted slightly, replaced by quiet acknowledgement. Jamal's mother squeezed his hand, tears glinting in her eyes. Jamal breathed deeply, feeling a weight lift off his chest. The turning point had come. The unfair judgment, the whispered doubts, the heavy weight of misunderstanding, it was all beginning to shift. The judge continued, his tone measured but fair. "Young man, you are exonerated from any responsibility regarding the incident. Your actions were responsible and commendable. Let this serve as a reminder that intentions, honesty, and courage matter as much as outcomes. Jamal felt a rush of emotion. Relief, pride, and gratitude washed over him. The long morning of stress, humiliation, and uncertainty was finally reaching a resolution. He looked toward the man in the dark suit, whose presence had been a silent reassurance throughout. Though Jamal still did not know who he was, he felt the quiet promise of justice fulfilled. As the courtroom began to settle, Jamal's mother leaned down, whispering once more, "You were brave, Jamal. You faced unfairness and stayed true to yourself. That's something no one can take away from you." Jamal nodded, feeling a warmth spread through him. The turning point had come, and he had survived it. The tension of judgment had given way to the acknowledgement of truth. And in that moment, he understood something important. Standing firm in honesty, even when the world doubts you, can change everything. The courtroom had changed. The air that had felt heavy and suffocating earlier now seemed lighter, almost breathable. Jamal sat with his mother, hands finally relaxed on his lap. He could feel the tension of the morning slowly leaving him, replaced by a cautious sense of relief. The judge, still seated at his bench, shuffled through the papers one last time. His eyes were sharper now, but they no longer carried the weight of quick judgment. There was a subtle change in his expression, a hint of acknowledgement that truth had a power stronger than prejudice. "Jamal Carter," the judge said, his voice calmer than before. "After reviewing all the evidence and statements, including those provided today, it is clear that you are not responsible for the incident at the store." Jamal's chest lifted, a rush of relief flooding him. He had hoped for this moment, but hearing it aloud made the triumph feel real. He could see the subtle reactions around the courtroom, heads nodding, whispers of agreement, and quiet admiration for his honesty and patience. "You have acted responsibly and with good intentions," the judge continued. "Let this be a reminder to all that judgment must be fair and assumptions must never replace evidence." Jamal felt a lump rise in his throat. The words meant more than just exoneration. They meant recognition. After hours of tension, whispers, and the invisible weight of judgment, someone in authority had seen the truth. Someone had finally acknowledged his courage and honesty. From the corner of the courtroom, the man in the dark suit finally stood. Jamal noticed him moving toward the bench. There was a quiet authority in his movements, the kind that made the room instinctively take notice. His presence carried weight, though he had said nothing all morning. The man approached the judge and spoke briefly, quietly. Though Jamal could not hear the words, he could see the judge's posture change slightly, his expression softening. Something important had been said. Justice was not just in the words of the judge, but in the presence of someone ensuring fairness was honored. The man turned slightly, and Jamal caught a brief glance of him. There was recognition in those eyes, an acknowledgement that Jamal's struggle had been witnessed, understood, and respected. Though Jamal did not yet know the man's identity, he felt the reassurance of someone who could influence fairness in his favor. "Jamal," the judge said finally, "you are free to leave this courtroom, and you should be proud of how you handled yourself today." A wave of relief and pride swept through Jamal. He wanted to smile, to laugh, to cry, all at once. But he stayed composed, letting the quiet satisfaction settle deep inside him. His mother's hand was firm on his shoulder, her eyes shining, with pride and relief. "You did it, Jamal," she whispered softly. "You stayed honest, and you stayed strong. I'm so proud of you." Jamal nodded, feeling the warmth of her words. For a long time he had felt powerless, judged unfairly, and misunderstood. But now that feeling was fading. Courage and honesty had won the day, and the invisible weight of judgment no longer pressed on his shoulders. As he stood, the man in the dark suit approached them. Jamal's mother looked at him curiously, sensing that this was someone important, someone who had quietly guided the fairness of the morning. "Mr. Carter?" the man asked gently, his voice calm but filled with authority. Jamal's mother's eyes widened slightly. "Yes," she replied, her voice steady but surprised. "I'm Jamal's mother." The man's gaze shifted to Jamal. "You have a brave son," he said. He stayed honest and composed, even when the situation was difficult. "That deserves recognition." Jamal felt a mixture of surprise and pride. The man's words carried weight, not just because of his authority, but because they acknowledged the struggle Jamal had endured. For the first time that day, it felt like someone truly understood. The judge stood, nodding slightly toward the man in the suit. "Thank you for your presence and oversight. Today's outcome reflects fairness, in part because of your guidance." The man inclined his head slightly, a quiet acknowledgement. He turned back to Jamal and his mother. "Remember this day," he said. "You faced unfairness with courage and honesty. That is a strength that will guide you through life." Jamal's mother nodded, a small smile forming on her lips. "We will remember, sir," she said. "Thank you for ensuring justice was done." Jamal felt a rush of gratitude. The tension of the morning, the humiliation, the silent fear, all of it had led to this moment of recognition and fairness. It was a lesson he would carry forever, that truth, patience, and courage could overcome even the harshest judgments. The courtroom slowly emptied. People who had been skeptical now glanced at Jamal with a subtle respect. Some offered nods, acknowledging his composure, even if they had initially doubted him. The whispers that had once carried judgment now seemed filled with admiration as Jamal and his mother walked out of the courthouse. The sunlight outside felt warmer, brighter, and freer. The tension that had weighed on him all morning had lifted, replaced by the quiet strength of justice served. Jamal breathed deeply, feeling the fresh air fill his lungs. He had faced unfairness, been judged incorrectly, and yet had stood firm in truth. Now he could finally move forward, knowing that honesty and courage had not only protected him, but had earned him recognition and respect. His mother squeezed his hand once more. "You were amazing today, Jamal," she said. "Never forget the strength you have." Jamal nodded, a small but confident smile forming. "I won't, Mom," he said. "I won't forget." And in that moment, as they walked together toward the bright open streets outside the courthouse, Jamal felt a quiet pride that came not just from being exonerated, but from knowing that he had faced the challenge with honesty, courage, and integrity. The morning's ordeal had ended, and a new chapter of confidence and resilience had begun. The courthouse doors closed behind Jamal and his mother, and the city's sounds filled the air. Traffic buzzed, people hurried past, and the sunlight reflected off the sidewalks in warm patches. For the first time that day, Jamal felt free, not just free from the tension of the courtroom, but free from the weight of unfair judgment. He took a deep breath, letting the air fill his lungs. It felt different now, lighter somehow, as if the morning's struggle had cleared a path for something better. He glanced at his mother. Her eyes sparkled with pride, and her smile was steady, warm, and genuine. "You did it, Jamal," she said softly, squeezing his hand. "You stayed honest, brave, and calm. You showed everyone what it means to do the right thing." Jamal nodded. "It wasn't easy, Mom. I felt scared and judged. But I tried to do what was right. I didn't want to let anyone down." "You didn't just do the right thing," his mother replied. "You stayed strong even when things were unfair. That's something many people never learn to do." Jamal let the words sink in. He had faced misunderstanding, whispers, and the heavy weight of false assumptions. Yet he had endured. He had stood firm in honesty. And now, walking out into the sunlight, he realized that the morning had changed him. As they started toward the street, Jamal noticed a familiar figure standing nearby, the man in the dark suit who had quietly overseen the courtroom that morning. He seemed to be waiting for them. There was an air of calm authority about him, but also a subtle warmth that made him approachable. "Mr. Daniels," Jamal's mother said, recognizing him now as the man who had testified in court. "Thank you for everything today. I don't even know how to express our gratitude." Mr. Daniels smiled faintly, nodding. "No thanks are necessary. The truth needed to be seen, and he stayed true to it. That is what mattered." His gaze shifted to Jamal. "You should be proud of yourself, young man. It takes courage to stay honest when the world seems against you." Jamal felt his chest swell. No one had spoken to him with such acknowledgement before, not the judge, not the witnesses, not even strangers. And here was someone who mattered, telling him that his honesty and courage were recognized. It was a feeling he would never forget. I just wanted to do the right thing," Jamal said quietly. "Exactly," Mr. Daniels replied, "and that is why you succeeded. Not because the world always notices, but because you stayed true to yourself. That is the most important victory of all." Jamal's mother reached over and squeezed his shoulder again. "See? That's why today matters. You proved that honesty and courage can overcome even the hardest challenges." The words lingered in Jamal's mind as they walked down the steps of the courthouse. He felt a new sense of strength and confidence. The morning's trials, the fear, the judgment, and the tension, they had all led to this moment of clarity. He had faced unfairness, and he had emerged stronger, braver, and wiser. The city seemed brighter now, as if reflecting the change within him. Children ran past on the sidewalks, vendors called out their greetings, and the distant sound of a bus horn felt almost cheerful. Jamal noticed small details he had ignored before: the way sunlight shone on the leaves of the trees lining the street, the laughter of children playing nearby, the comforting hum of life continuing around him. For the first time, he felt a quiet pride, not just in being cleared of blame, but in himself. He had stayed honest, he had stood tall, and he had faced unfairness with courage. That was his true victory. "Jamal," his mother said softly, breaking his thoughts, "this day will always remind you of what you are capable of. You can face challenges, speak your truth, and stay strong, even when others doubt you." "I'll remember, Mom," Jamal said with a small smile. "I won't forget how it felt to stay true and finally be seen for who I really am." As they continued walking, Jamal noticed that people on the street seemed to give him small, respectful glances. Perhaps they sensed the quiet confidence he now carried. Perhaps they recognized the strength in standing tall after a morning of challenge. Either way, Jamal felt a sense of belonging he hadn't felt before, a reminder that courage and truth could shine even in difficult moments. They reached the park nearby, a place Jamal loved to visit after school. He paused for a moment, breathing in the fresh air and feeling the sunlight on his face. The events of the morning, the tension, the fear, they all seemed distant now. He realized that today had been more than just a courtroom battle. It had been a test of his character, and he had passed. Jamal turned to his mother and smiled genuinely this time. "Thank you, Mom, for believing in me, for staying with me, and for helping me stay strong." She smiled back, tears glinting in her eyes. "You did it all yourself, Jamal. Today you proved what I've always known. You have courage and honesty beyond your years." They stood together for a moment, watching the children play, listening to the birds, feeling the warm breeze. For Jamal, the day had begun with fear and uncertainty, but it ended with pride, strength, and hope. He had faced injustice, endured the weight of judgment, and emerged stronger than before. And as they walked home, side by side, Jamal felt it deeply. This was not just the end of a difficult morning. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one where he knew the power of honesty, courage, and integrity. One where he could face the world with confidence, knowing that staying true to himself would always guide him forward. The challenges he had faced in the courthouse were behind him now. Ahead lay a world full of possibilities, and Jamal felt ready to meet it, one brave, honest step at a time.